Take two.
We're really good at doing things over. We're really good at taking two. Taking two is our natural first take.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
We're talking psychedelics.
Yay! I love this subject.
You do love this subject. You love this subject so much. You're doing a whole year of study on it.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm doing a whole year certification program.
I'm
so excited.
What is this certification program? Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, amazing. So it's through Psychedelics Today, and they have a program called Vital, and this is the 4th year of this program. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's a year-long certification where there's teachers from all over, clinicians, professionals, activists, advocates, like you name it. There's everybody's in that space, and the goal and the mission is to help inform professionals and non-professionals who have a desire to learn more about psychedelics or to actually be a part of the psychedelic renaissance, revolution, movement, whatever you want to call it, to inform and educate them on the history of psychedelics, what the movement is, how psychedelics work, how they can be used for healing and trauma recovery. So for me, it felt like a great next step in my professional journey to invest in that, because I have amazing, beautiful, and a couple not so beautiful experiences on psychedelics. And they've all been incredibly informative in my own personal healing journey from trauma. And so I've always had this desire to want to be on the front lines, so to speak, or the underground front lines of this movement. And joining this program just felt like that next step. That's like, wow, this is going to connect me to a network of people, an abundance of resources, while also continuing to deepen my own education around what's happening in the psychedelic space and beyond.
So this is an education qualification? Does it empower you in some way?
Yeah, I think so.
The qualification?
I think so. Well, for me, it's like everything. I love learning. I love studying. I didn't really enjoy the traditional model of what it looks like to go to college and take all these classes that you should know, but you may never use in your life. And so coming out of college, it was like, there's so many things that I want to study and explore, and I didn't want to have to follow like a traditional format for doing that. And so ever since I left university, I've been doing these different trainings that I feel like fill in those educational pockets for me, so that when I'm coming to my clients or we're facilitating retreats, there's this really comprehensive energy behind it that's like I'm studying all of these areas of interest so that I can compile them into something cohesive and use that to serve our clients, my clients,
and what is
people in general.
What does this course or education qualification give you at the end of it?
What do you mean?
Does it empower you to hold spaces? Like, does it?
I think it's truly individual. So for me personally,
so it's purely a piece of education. It's not like a certification in facilitation of spaces.
Right, like you don't leave it in a year and you're a shaman.
Right.
Or you don't leave in a year and you necessarily have like
a doctorate.
And there's no PhD, there's nothing like this. It's more of like...
It's educational.
It's educational, and it provides like a network of people who are in both the professional and non-professional space, so that should you want to enter in as a practitioner or as a facilitator, you now have the options and opportunity to do that, as I feel like places like that are looking for some type of certification or background in these fields.
So this is recognizing that there is this surge and popularity of psychedelics in culture now, and as a way to promote healthy use and the honoring of people's experience, this certification, this course aids in that by empowering its participants with the knowledge of it so that they can use it correctly themselves and then encourage others to do so as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. Because
Okay.
I feel there is such a mix of people in there. We've got lawyers in there. We've got people working in like ecobiology. We have actual clinicians, psychologists in there. We have people who are the coaches and in that mentorship space in there. And then there's also just like everyday people who are just like really, really curious about what's happening and have that desire to be a part of the cog of the machine.
Okay. And what are you studying this year? I think you mentioned about an elective or...
Yeah, so we get to invest in a specialized pathway. And so originally it was going to be one, but this year they're giving us two, which I'm excited for because it was hard. Like there's like 5 specialties, and it's kind of challenging, like to decide like just pick one. And I totally understood their line of thinking where they're like, it forces you to focus.
Sure.
But enough of us are like, oh my God, this is so hard that we actually get to. But one of them will be accredited, and the other will just be for your own personal
Enjoyment,
yeah. Okay. And so...
What have you chosen?
I've chosen depth psychology, which is
depth psychology.
So
Okay.
Carl Jung's
we go
work,
deep.
super deep,
Okay.
into the unconscious, programming. Yeah, it's all based on like Carl Jung's work. And I chose a secondary specialty of microdosing because that keeps coming up into my field. It's like microdosing, ways that I feel people can safely and effectively learn about these medicines, be in the ecology of these medicines while seeing how they help with anxiety or trauma or stress, pregnancy, PTSD, all these different elements. So, but it was tough. There was like spiritual emergence, which super interests me.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Like it's amazing.
So other people in the course are studying these as well?
Yeah.
Okay, spiritual emergence.
Spiritual emergence, regenerative businesses, microdosing, depth psychology, trauma and somatics.
Okay.
Which for me, I was like, I feel pretty good in the trauma and somatics element. So I felt like this was a great opportunity to explore something that I've always been passionate about, which is psychology.
Okay. And the microdosing.
And the microdosing.
Okay. So you
I just want to be the one that just like, here, just take little bits at a time and see how you feel. And let's like do this work together, especially in one-on-one client work. I feel like that's the next wave of healing for people.
So you could make friends with people who have their primary elective in that other aspect.
In any other aspect, yeah.
And that could fill in the blanks by learning what they're, or just conversing with them about what they're learning.
Totally. And even as you're saying that, it's like, oh, I see how this could be so fulfilling in like my vision for a nonprofit or like an NGO, where it's like, oh, how are we bringing all these people who have studied and are passionate about these different walks of life and these different ways of healing that are slightly alternative to the mainstream, and create something really powerful that gives power back to the people, gives them a sense of autonomy, the ability to self-heal, and just explore the alternatives that are out there.
Okay. Sounds very, very interesting. What did you learn this week?
This week we were talking about systems.
Systems.
And it's actually really interesting because when I think of systems, and also like the instructor that we had this week is talking about all the different systems that can create impact on us and our bodies. And the way that I think so often we've been taught that like mind and body are a separate system, and so they need to be treated separately, or the immune system and the digestive system are separate systems, so they need to be treated separately.
Right.
As opposed to everything being an entire system, we're not separate from it. And starting to, I guess, like build the awareness of the impacts of those systems, which brought me back to trauma and somatics, because we talk about internal family systems, we talk about the sites of our shaping, which are like all these factors that influence how we think, feel, and behave. And recognizing that I think we've been very well trained and conditioned to just see ourselves as the individual and to see ourselves as separate. Whereas like when we were talking in trauma, it's like, no, it's not an individual experience, it's a collective experience. So when we start to look at all of the systems and all of the ecologies of those systems and how they impact us, We recognize that we're really not so separate from it. It's almost impossible to be separate from it.
Right. So like our human brains want to separate them into different systems, but then in doing so we forget the interconnectivity of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like our body and the way our body operates is all one system. They each have their, we talked about this on Intimacy with God a little bit, they each have their own parts, but all of the parts function for the whole.
Right.
So like treating digestion isn't just treating digestion, it's also treating your immune system, it's also clarifying your mind. It has these other ripple effects and benefits that I feel like mainstream pharmaceutical industries, for instance, miss that. Or they're treating a symptom in a problem, right? But then even with like pharmaceutical pills, not saying pharmaceuticals are bad, that comes with a plethora of side effects that impact these other systems.
Right. It's not a holistic
right.
approach.
Whereas with plant medicines or even just like herbalist medicines, tinctures, you know, things like that are not necessarily psychedelic. It's kind of this like return to nature, which is the system.
How did that tie in with this? Did it tie in with the psychedelics this week? The introduction of systems. Was there a tie-in to psychedelia?
The way that I connected it was it reminded me of the first class that we had, second class that we had, sorry, that was more around like the history of psychedelics and this idea of animism, which I feel like I've experienced, especially on psilocybin before.
Can you tell me what that is?
Animism is where there is no, everything is animate. And we're all connected, and so it's like just as the trees have their own animate energy, we have our own animate energy. And again, we're not separate. We're all a part of the natural world, and we're all working within the system of that natural world.
So it's not animate in the sense like, not animal, but animate in the sense that it has life.
It has life, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So not animal in the sense that we think of a dog.
Right.
But animal in the sense of like primal.
It's a being.
Yeah, it's a being. It's an energy. It's an entity. And we're not so separate from the trees, or we're not really that separate from this couch. You know, everything has its own life force energy. Everything's always moving.
It's all living.
Right. And so I think in psychedelic experiences, we kind of have those breakthroughs.
Right. The couch becomes alive.
Right. And it's like, it's moving, it's breathing. You know, there's been times where I'm like, now's the time. Like I've seen a mirror and I'm like, I'm going to put my hand through that mirror. And I don't. Yeah, I don't. But it's just like, I can see the animate energy within everything, or that energy of like, this looks solid. But what we know is that it's actually just a bunch of atoms and particles that are bouncing around each other, but it gives the appearance of solidity.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I see systems. It's like, I see us as separate. Like, that's clearly your body, and there's a line. Your skin has a barrier, and there's a line between you and me, and a line between you and the space between us, when in reality, that's actually not true.
Right. And then on psychedelics, the boundaries blur.
Yeah.
And merge.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
It's the dissolution of self, and I see how that can be really terrifying for some people. But also, I've seen in some experiences where it's been, like, especially for me, it's been absolute bliss. I'm like, oh my gosh, to not hold a boundary, or to not have to hold this barrier or carry anything, and just allow myself to melt into the oneness of this entity and of this ecosystem that we're in, can feel so blissful.
I think there's an interesting point there of, you know, for some people, psychedelics can be very destabilizing because it does do that. And for other people, it's very liberating because it does do that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if at some point in your course, you'll touch on how to encourage people towards the liberating aspect of psychedelics compared to the destabilizing aspect.
I totally think we're going to touch on that, because a lot of the work with psychedelics, they talk about like set and setting. And so it's like the importance of, you're not just like eating a bag of mushrooms and crossing your fingers that you don't have a bad trip. It's like, okay.
That's what this course is.
Yeah. I've
Here's
been
your
there.
mushrooms,
I've
everyone.
been there. Don't do that. Don't do that. But it's about like cultivating this connection of like respect and of honor, of of the plant itself, of the medicine itself, spending time beforehand, like really being with your body, being with your intention, being with the questions that you want to bring into the medicine space, and doing all these little things that are quite mindful in order to set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that you won't touch upon shadow things or sensitive things or potentially touch upon traumas? No, but at least you're in the right headspace and you've already set yourself up for success, that when or if or should that happen, whether you're in a solo journey or you're with a practitioner or a clinician, you know you've already prepped yourself and your system for how to have the most successful experience possible.
Sure.
And a lot of that comes from how you do the pre-ceremony, and then of course afterwards, like how you integrate after. And for the people that don't have tools, that can be really challenging.
Sure. I'm going to pause you on that because it's beyond the scope of what you did this week and last week, and an invitation to tie what you did in last week and this week into how that moves towards promoting that. Because it seems like you've gone on even in 2 weeks, you've gone on a journey of saying, well, everything is, it has life force energy and everything's animate. And then you've gone and say, well, everything's animate and it's built on systems. And how does that recognition, or how do you see it as like moving or congealing into the psychedelia?
I really see even the systems work as really foundational. And I've seen in my own experience when I was in my trauma healing and somatics certification, just even building the awareness of the layers with which life can impact and traumatize us as individuals. So thinking about, like we were talking about systems, there's like myself, right? So there's a system happening within myself. There's a system that's happening in relation to you and I. There's a system of Mexico City that is, one way or another, impacting us. There's a system of Mexico in general. There's the system of the climate that impacts us. And so even without psychedelics, we can start to tune into that and go, oh my gosh, no wonder I think, feel, and behave the way that I am. There's a system of religion, right? There's a system of education. So all of these things impact how we feel about ourselves. Bring psychedelics into the mix, which is its own system, still operating in the oneness of the animate system. Bring that into this system, right? And then start to expand and feel that and be able to be more with that experience. Can create a lot of shifts and healing for people because it touches upon areas that might not have been able to be accessed otherwise because the unconscious wall of defense is up. There's trauma there. And so in working with psychedelics, it can create a safe space to open up to seeing how these other systems have impacted who you think you are, what you think your role is in this life, and how you feel about that and why.
Okay, so the value of learning about the animate nature of everything, and then the idea of systems is that it is providing a framework that can be opened up to when utilizing psychedelics, and give more of an awareness of these things that are there but aren't given much focus to. And when using psychedelics, you become innately more aware of them, but without the knowledge of them, it's like, well, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, because I think in our waking state, we're so me focused. We're so egotistical and so, narcissistic in that way. That's like we wake up and it's like my day. What do I want with my day? Like we're so focused on our personal experience. It's easy to get blinders. Whereas the systems work, whether you're in psychedelics or not, it opens that view of perception up that goes, okay. So some people you can think about, they're like, oh, this is just the way that I am. It's like, oh, well, if we actually went down the timeline and we started to examine the systems that have influenced the way you are, we would actually probably find that the way you are is an adaptive behavior in order to receive love, in order to receive acceptance, to feel like you belong in a certain society. So how much of those behaviors are actually truly you? Psychedelics give us the opportunity, and systems work, to explore like what of our personality traits were actually adaptive and what of our personality and way of being in the world is actually really true to our soul and to our essence. And that can be a bit of a shock. Psychedelics are not, you know.
Right. Okay. So it's worth understanding it and learning about it before psychedelics reveals it.
It just
in
depends.
a shocking way.
Yeah, or just ensuring that if you're going to go down the psychedelic route in order to explore that you prepared yourself or that you're with somebody who knows how to hold that space and can guide that journey. Because we all know what it's like to self-spiral, and psychedelics can make that experience way deep, way more intense. And so if you have somebody there that can keep guiding you back into the healing energy of it without bypassing,
and knows the map.
It can be truly, truly beautiful. And so that's what I love about systems work, is that it allows us to step outside of who we've been or who we've always been. Allows us to kind of like, it's like we take a step out and we get to look at all of the factors that influence that. And then from that place of greater awareness, we could then pivot and go, that's not true for me. That's not true for me. That feels pretty right. I feel that in my soul. Yes, I want that. And then we come back to this like beautiful place of autonomy and sovereignty around. If there are things that I don't like about my personality and that I want to change, what do I need to do to pivot and do that? And what psychedelics offer, it's just like such a tiny piece. Like I feel like so many people get hung up on like psychedelics is the thing. And I think it's just a small piece of that, where it just creates a space where you get to go behind the veil of your thinking mind and be present with like the oneness of everything and just feel that innate sense of belonging with the world and with everything else.
Is there anything else you learned the last 2 weeks that you want to talk about? Touch on, share, allude to?
I think the last thing that I'll say is we did some like legalization stuff last week, where we just talked about the United States in particular and where the states are at in terms of like legalization and decriminalization. And it was interesting because I didn't realize, like I was in Oregon when legislation passed to decriminalize like most things. And that was like a big celebration for the psychedelic space. And then now it's kind of like redacted to some degree because there was an influx of abuse, because now that it was decriminalized, more people were using. And so it was like redacted, and what it's showing me, and I think cannabis showed me the same thing, is that I guess it's like even a parallel to healing journey, whereas like for every one step forward we make as a collective, there's innately going to be 2 steps back of a contraction, because with that extra freedom, you get to see where people who would use and abuse that energy do so. And then there's this natural contraction that goes, okay, how do we want to deal with that as a collective? Well, and then we expand a little bit more, and then we kind of contract. So
I feel part of that conversation is, well, you've legalized something without educating people.
Right, well, they decriminalized it, they didn't legalize it.
Sorry, they decriminalized it, but then
yeah,
without still educating people. So then how can you encourage proper usage if you're not providing the education to use it?
Totally. And I think that's actually a big part of why Vital started these programs.
Right.
Was like, okay, the landscape is changing. We noticed that. This is like the second wave. If the 60s were the first wave, this would be the second wave. And I really do feel their desire to educate people so that these practices are held more safely. And it's not just any Illuminati shaman coming up here saying, here's some bufo, I had an epic experience one time. Good luck afterwards, you know? And so wanting to create more informed spaces and more educated spaces so that as the Renaissance or revolution happens, as it's naturally going to, again, it's its own animate system. right? It's going to go through its own process just like everything else does. How can we work with it for the betterment of all of it?
Right.
You know,
How
so
can we
like,
encourage it to move in a positive direction? Yeah, that's
so that way power in people's hands is of purpose and is of passion, not just of like, woohoo, fucking let's.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm doing this, because if it can continue to trickle through, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I met with a gentleman yesterday who's also in Vital, but the year ahead of me. And he said something that I felt like was really true and really powerful. Is it's like, it's not even necessarily through talking about it that the expansion of it occurs. It's like through even the most subtle shifts in our being. And people will notice that. Like people will notice that you're less anxious. They'll notice that you've got these genius ideas, that you're more connected to your body. You can see those differences and feel those differences. And so just by being the embodied energy of that, naturally, that will ripple out, and really trusting that. Like that's the real underground of this, is like, he called himself like the silent warrior. Because it's a silent war. We're all going through it internally, and
it's just be the glitch you want to see in the matrix.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And part of my glitch is talking about it.
Yeah, I mean,
I just want to expand people's awareness that it doesn't have to be this like shameful experience, and there's a lot. Well, there has been, of course, like negative elements to the exploration of this system. There's also a lot of benefits, and so I want there to be a mutually beneficial conversation happening so people can make up their minds for themselves.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, I look forward to learning more next week. Today I learned about Animus, that everything is alive, essentially, living. It has life force energy, and that everything is then built on systems. Systems upon systems upon systems.
It's infinite.
It's fractal. It's like systems that just repeat themselves in varying degrees of zoomed in and zoomed outness.
Right. And the last thing that I'll say is that, you know, we touched upon like organicity and how the systems are always trying to find balance naturally from between the two polarities, you know. And so it's just like nature self-sustains, all of the systems are trying to do that. And they just bounce back and forth between the poles just like as we do. And so it's again like,
it's just at a
the
bigger
systems
level.
are always trying to reharmonize. And part of that is like the negative aspects of life. You know, like war is a part of the system trying to reharmonize and recalibrate. Yeah. And so without it, we wouldn't know that there is this polarizing energy. So that was interesting for me. That's like, oh, even if, I don't know, it kind of gave me this idea, notion, whatever, where it's like, man, if I really did just like take my foot off the gas and I surrendered a little bit more, I wouldn't need to feel the desire to be so in control of everything, because I feel like I'm the one that has to make it recalibrate. If I just like took my hands off the wheel and let nature do what nature does, then naturally I'm going to be taken on this journey of organicity as well and finding that balance. So there's something to explore there. I was like, oh, that's some food for thought.
No, look forward to hearing more about food and thoughts next installment.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.